At this time, we're about to take up this month's second coin offering, and so if you got any change, raise your hand. The kids will come around and they will collect the coins. All this money, of course, goes to the Fellowship Track League. Send out tracks all around the world. And Miss River has prepared the song this evening, so whenever you're ready, River, you can go ahead and start playing. Thank you very much. River, she did a great job, didn't she? She takes after me, I think. All right, well, if you would open your Bibles to Psalm 27. Psalm number 27. We're going to take a look at this psalm this evening, and it's been a couple weeks again since we looked at a psalm. The days that we go to the nursing home are long Sundays, and I feel like I sing all day, and so it's a wonder I still have a voice, but here it is. So praise the Lord, I guess. Psalm 27. We're going to go ahead and read this psalm, and then we'll look at it. It says, verse number 1, it says, it's a psalm of David. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident. One thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. He shall set me upon a rock. And now shall mine head be lifted up above mine enemies round about me. Therefore will I offer in his tabernacle sacrifices of joy. I will sing, yea, I will sing praises unto the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice. Have mercy also upon me, and answer me. When thou saidst, seek my face, my heart said unto thee, thy face, Lord, will I seek. Hide not thy face far from me, but put not thy servant away in anger. Thou hast been my help, leave me not, neither forsake me, O God of my salvation. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in the plain path because of mine enemies. Deliver me not over unto the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty. I had fainted unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. And so this is really, it's a song of hope. It's a song of praise. It's a song of prayer. It contains a little bit of everything. And you read this, it simply just says it's a psalm of David. There's no occasion upon which it was written, and there are many psalms that are like this. You read through, if you just flip through, you'll find that many of these psalms are just a psalm of David. And I think one of the benefits of that for us is that it can be applicable to a variety of situations, a variety of circumstances. There's not one thing where this applies. It's to all things. And David, of course, facing many different trials and troubles throughout his days, being under attack and being chased and followed. There's many occasions on which you could apply this. But as I was studying it, Charles Spurgeon, in his commentary on this psalm, he draws a connection to a particular instance that I think is similar to what David writes about. And you find in the book of 1 Samuel, chapters 20 through about chapter 22, you read about a man named Doeg. It kind of looks like Doug, but I didn't want to call him Doug because he's not a very good guy. So I looked up the Hebrew, how do they pronounce it? And he said, Doeg, like that. Doeg. So there you go. If you want to know how to pronounce my name, just look up the Hebrew, how do you pronounce David, and then you'll know we've been doing it wrong. But Doeg is a guy who spoke against David to Saul. And a few of the reasons that Spurgeon connects these two, this psalm to that instance is because he talks about in verses 2 and 3, the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh. They stumbled and fell, though an host should encamp against me. Obviously, he's being pursued. He's got enemies and foes, those that are after him, but that's most of David's life. But if you look down in verse number 12, he specifically says this, deliver me not over into the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty. And I think, what happened between David and Saul, and then what happened with this man, this Edomite Doeg, is that he spoke against him. And it was his words that ended up bringing about harm. I think many of us can relate to that, can we not? Where people's words can cause us harm, they can cause us troubles. And sometimes, I learned this when I was growing up, that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's a lie, isn't it? There are words you could say that would just cut me right to the heart, And a lot of times it's not the words themselves, but it's the person that said it. It's the words of a close friend that are cutting words. They hurt really deeply. And what this man said was not an insult of David, but let's go ahead and let's go back and read through a little bit of this narrative. So keep your place in Psalm 27, and then turn back to 1 Samuel chapter number 20. 1 Samuel chapter number 20. And if you go back to the book of 1 Samuel, Eli begins this book. He's the last of the judges, and then he appoints Saul as the first king of Israel. If you remember, Israel wanted a king. They wanted to be like all the other nations. They didn't have one, or they didn't realize that God was their king. So God tells Samuel to anoint Saul, make him king. Saul had the opportunity to be a great king, did he not? He had the opportunity to lead people closer to God, but what happened was he started to take things into his own hands, not obeying God, not allowing Samuel to do what he was supposed to do. There's times that Saul offered sacrifices that Samuel was supposed to offer. There was times that Saul was supposed to destroy nations, and he didn't. He kept things alive. And so God came to him through Samuel, and in chapter 15, he said, you're not going to be king anymore. He said, you don't know how to obey me. You don't know how to do what you're supposed to do, so I'm going to take this position from you. You know what Saul said? Oh, okay, God, I'm sorry I messed up. No, he said, he basically determined from that point on, God's not going to take this from me. And I don't know at what point David found out, or Saul found out it was going to be David. Of course, David comes along after that. He slays Goliath. He becomes kind of a warrior for Saul. Saul sends him out on these battles. He leads men and women, and David just becomes a man of war. And all of a sudden, the nation falls in love with David. And the women start singing, you know, Saul's killed his thousands, but David's killed his 10,000s. And look at David, man. He's a good-looking guy. He's powerful. He's smart. That's why my mom named me David, because I'm like him. She hoped I would be like him. And so, all of a sudden, Saul, he's mad that God's departed. The Bible says that God departed from Saul. And then the Bible says this, that God was with David. And I think Saul could make the connection, God's departed from me, he's with David, everybody likes David, so I hate David. And that was Saul's opinion toward David from, I don't know, chapter 17 or 18 on. And you read, I know I said 20, but I'm going to read a verse in chapter 19, verse 1. It says, and Saul spake to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. That's why he said, we're going to kill David. And in Saul's mind, I know this doesn't directly apply to the psalm, but it'll get there. But in his mind, Saul thought, if I could kill David, then nobody's going to take this kingdom from me. Saul thought David was going to take it. But who's going to take it? God. God was going to take it. And you go up against somebody thinking, he thought he was fighting against David. He was fighting against God. And when you fight against God, you lose. And so Saul was fighting a losing battle this whole time. And so here in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 1 and 2, we'll read this. It says, and David fled from Naioth to Ramah, and came and said before Jonathan, what have I done? What is mine iniquity? And what is my sin before thy father, that he seeketh my life? And he said unto him, God forbid, thou shalt not die. Behold, my father will do nothing, either great or small, but that he will show it me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so. And so David's saying, what have I done to make Saul so mad at me? And Jonathan, this is Saul's son, says, oh, he's not going to kill you. You're overreacting. If he was going to kill you, he would have told me. So then he and Jonathan talk for a while, and they come up with a plan. And Jonathan's going to go meet with Saul. And when Saul realizes David's not there, he's going to gauge his reaction to find out how mad Saul is that David's not there. And David said, look, you're going to find out he's going to be furious. He wants to kill me. And so that's what happens. So by the end of this chapter, Jonathan realizes, oh yeah, my dad really wants to kill you. And so David flees. So then you jump down to chapter 21. Then came David to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, why art thou alone, and no man with thee? And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, the king hath commanded me a business, and then said unto me, let no man know anything about the business whereabout I send thee. And when I have commanded thee, and I have appointed my servants to such and such a place, now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what there is present. So David goes to this little city called Nob. That sounds like somewhere that would be in West Virginia, isn't it? Nob, like Spruce Knob or Bickles Knob. It's just Nob. And this is a little town. It's a Benjamite town. It's a city of priests. In fact, the Bible calls it that, a city of priests later. And David goes there. He meets with this priest, Ahimelech. He's hungry. He needs some food. And so Ahimelech says, all I have is the showbread. You know, that's what's going to go into the temple. That's for God. Jesus references this story in the Gospels. He says, remember when David did that? That wasn't a sin. So David, the priest, gives him the bread. David says, also, I need a weapon. He says, all we've got is the sword of Goliath. The priest gives David the sword. So David takes the bread and the sword, and he leaves. The whole time that David is there, there's a man there named Doeg. Look at verse 7. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. So you find out about Doeg. Number one, he's not an Israelite. He's an Edomite. The Edomites are descendants of Esau, and Edomites were not big fans of the Israelites. And so Edom, he doesn't care about Israel, and yet he's working for Saul. And that's a kind of a red flag in and of itself. But he's there the whole time, and he sees what David's doing. He sees what the priest does for David. So then what happens? You go down in verse number 9 of chapter 22. Actually, let's go back. Let's jump to chapter 22, verse 6. It says, when Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men that were with him, now Saul abode in Gibeah under a tree in Ramah, having his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. Here's Saul. He's pursuing David. He's like, where is he? He's got his spear. He wants to kill him himself. And he hears about David. And what happens in verse 9, it says, then answered Doeg, the Edomite, which was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, and he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him victuals, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. He says, I saw David, I saw what he did, and he says specifically, I saw this priest help him out. So then what happens is Saul says, all right, bring me this priest and all the other priests from Nob. So they come. They go to where Saul is, and Saul confronts them. He says, hey, what did you do? Why did you help David? He's my enemy. And the priest says, I didn't know he was your enemy. We thought he was sent by you. I would not have helped him. This is what he says, I would not have helped him if I knew he was your enemy. He says, we are innocent. We're just doing what we thought was right. And so you look in verse number 17, and the king said unto the footmen that stood about him, turn and slay. No, let's go back. Verse number 16. And the king said, thou shalt surely die, Ahimelech, thou and all thy father's house. He said, I don't care. I don't care what you think or what you did. You know, in this moment, Saul, you can see he's so blinded by rage. And that rage is by what? Pride. Because what? He believes that David is going to take his kingdom from him. In fact, I didn't read it, but God, there's a part where Saul is conversing with Jonathan, and he says to Jonathan, if this son of Jesse lives, he's going to take your kingdom. Saul thought if he could kill David, he could pass that kingdom to his son. That's what he wanted. Isn't it silly how when people get a hold of something, they become so afraid to let it go? If God gave you something and he wants you to keep it, he's going to keep it for you. You don't have to hold on to it. But if he wants to take it from you, it's probably best if you let him. Because the more you hold on to it, once again, you're fighting against God. And so God, he turns to, and this part's really interesting, verse 17, the king said unto the footmen that stood about him, turn and slay the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not show it to me. But the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priests of the Lord. Man, those are men of character. And he said, I want you to kill these priests. These are the priests. These aren't just priests of Baal. These aren't just holy men because they wear certain clothes. These are the priests of God. And they knew this. God had appointed them priests. God had chosen them to be priests. And to stand before the king who was furious and who was in a rage and who had a spear in his hand and to say no, that's a bold move. I think these men don't get as much credit as they deserve to stand before them. And so you think, well, they're good. Those guys are saved. Well, what happened in verse 18, the king said to Doeg, turn thou and fall upon the priests. And Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell upon the priests, and slew on that day 75 persons that did wear a linen ephod. And Nob, the city of the priests, smote he with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and sucklings, and oxen and asses and sheep with the edge of the sword. He killed 85 priests of the Lord, men of God. He just killed them with the sword. And then he goes to their town and kills all their families and everybody that was there. And Saul was the one that ordered it, the king of Israel. And you think about when you read in the rest of, 2 Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, all these wicked kings, you know what they followed an example set by the first king of turning on God's men because they did not like what God said. They did not like what God had done. And you know what happens is tens of thousands or maybe millions of people end up suffering the consequences because one man cannot just submit himself to God. So then you see, and I read all of this to point out, David here is on the run, and as he's running from Saul, following where God leads him to go, there are people that are constantly in pursuit of him. And they're doing everything they can to try to catch him. And this man, Doeg, because of his, specifically because of his word and because of his testimony, not only is David still on the run, but all of these other people are killed, and they're the victims of that. And so, go back here to Psalm 27, and we may reference that story some as we go through this. But this psalm, if you can put yourself in David's shoes, and then we read this psalm, as all of that is going on, you think, what a remarkable thing to write. During a time when men are trying to kill you, when the most powerful man in your world is trying to kill you, and he's destroying other people, to stand and say, the Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? Man, that's a confident man. That is a bold man. And so, this is a psalm really of hope, and one that is fitted for us as we go through trials to learn to lean on God. That's the purpose of this. Learn to lean on God. And so we're going to look at this psalm. I've got divided into 4 parts. The first 3 verses, we find David discussing or revealing to us the confidence that he has in God. I mean, this guy is overly confident in God, if you can be overly confident in God. He says in verse 1, the Lord's my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? And that's a thing about this, that my God is so powerful that my fear has no power in front of him. Fear has no power over me. You know how many people their lives are crippled by fear? It's not even by a person or by anything else. It's just the very fear that something could go wrong will destroy their life. David's saying, he's in real danger. He's not metaphorically fighting a battle. He's literally fighting a battle, and he's saying, I will have no fear. I got no fear. Now, it's one thing to write that and sing that. It's another thing to live it, right? We can sing it if it's up on the screen or if it's in our book, but how often can we live that? I will not fear. When troubles come, what should I be afraid of? In verse number 2, he says, when the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, come upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. You look, what he's talking about is, here's what has happened. Why is David so confident? Because God has proven himself time and time again. He's saying this, when the enemies came last time, they stumbled and fell. And so I just trust God will win for me again. In verse number 3, it says, though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear, and though war should rise up against me, in this will I be confident. In Charles Spurgeon's commentary on this, he talks about verse 3 as a picture of Christian peace. And look at it. He shows us the calmness with which he faces this trouble that's coming. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though the worst comes, and he knows it's coming, it's not like he's thinking if it comes. That's how a lot of times we think about troubles, right? If they come. But he's saying this, I know they're coming. When I ran away from where the king was, I know he's going to follow me. And yet I will not fear. And that is a calm, and he has a calmness about him. I'm not going to overreact. I'm not going to react in my fear or in my anger. I'm just going to let God deal with it. He says this also. He's showing confidence and he's showing trust in God in a way that he can endure what is happening right now. It's not just what's going to happen, but also what's right now. You know, you read about this. It's soon after this that David goes and hides in a cave. And after that, he's hiding in a forest. He's just hiding. And he goes from place to place, and through it all, he's continued to have confidence. And then he looks toward the future. And when it comes again, I'm going to have confidence even more. I'm going to continue to trust him. And what that produces in your life, if you can live life like that, it just produces a very strong faith, number one, and that comes out of you in praise. And you sing praises to God. You end up like David, where you can't help but, I'm not a poet, so I can't write stuff down, but I can tell you when God has blessed me, or I can find what somebody else has written that speaks what I'm trying to say. I can tell you that God has done something great in my life. Why? Not because I didn't have any trials, or I didn't have any troubles, but because God got me through them again and again. And the great stories are those that God got somebody through something that was impossible. That's a story you want to hear, is it not? I don't want to hear stories about somebody where nothing happened to them. I don't want to watch a movie where nothing happens. I want to see a trial that is overcome. And so that's a good picture of Christian peace, knowing this. Trials will come, but when they do, I can trust God. And then you look at verses 4 down through verse 6, we see David's, not just his confidence, but his love for that communion that he has with God. In verse 4, he says, "One thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life." I have this desire to dwell where God is. I want to be where he is. That's the most important thing in my life. And can I ask, is that the most important thing in your life? Oftentimes it is not. The most important thing in my life yesterday was watching West Virginia win. You know what happened? They lost. You know, when you set your confidence in something, anything earthly, it doesn't matter what it was, at some point it will fail you. Right? I've learned that from being a West Virginia fan, and keeps me close to God. No, but there's a lot greater things and more serious things we put our trust in, but they can fail us. But you put your trust in God, he will not. He says, that's what I seek after. If David was seeking after the approval of Saul, he would have failed. Seeking after the approval of other people, he would have failed. But all he was seeking was to be where God is. And so God led him to where he was. He says this, not just that, but his desire also is to behold the beauty of the Lord. I want to dwell in his house. If you're going to dwell in his house, you're going to see his beauty. If you want to see his beauty, you got to be where he is. You got to be close. You know, the closer you get, the more beautiful that he would seem. In Psalm 96, verse 9, it says, "O worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. Fear before him all the earth." You know what makes God beautiful is his holy. Absolutely holy. He's absolutely separate and different from the rest of this world. That's what makes him beautiful. If he was like us in any way, he would not be beautiful. It is his holiness. And so when you look at God's beauty, you see it because he's holy. And you know what that means? That if we're going to be like God, if we're going to get close to him, we've got to seek for that holiness in ourselves. I need to be set apart. I ought to want to be more like him and like he is. And I want to draw closer to him. And I think the closer that we get, the more of that holiness will rub off from him onto us. And the closer we get to him, the farther we get from the world, and things begin to look differently. I thought of that song, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." And the closer you get to God, the more you seek to be with him and to behold his beauty, the less beautiful everything else looks. You know, when I met my wife, I thought, man, she's the most beautiful girl in the whole world. And the more time I spend with her, the uglier everybody else looks. Isn't that interesting how that happens? And then I had these girls, and they're beautiful too, but nobody else compares. And you know, when you have your own kids, nobody else's kids are like your kids, are they? Really, nobody else's kids are like my kids, but you can say that. But you know how that is. You get close to somebody, and there's a connection that nobody else really matches that. Nobody else can come close. That's how we ought to be with God, where I want to be like him, and nothing else will satisfy me. Nothing else will please me. And then he says this, "I want to inquire in his temple." David, we read through his account, especially early on, before he made decisions, he sought the Lord. "I inquired of the Lord." You think about a man on the run, I want to know where I'm supposed to go. I ought to ask God. Because David could have run anywhere, but he sought the Lord. In chapter 21, David went to this priest. He was asking for bread. He was asking for help. He was seeking help from God. He inquired of the Lord. I think in our lives, we ought to seek God first. Later on, David's hiding. He's in a forest, and some people come to him, and they're like, the Philistines have attacked a city. The city is called Keilah. Actually, we're going to read a little bit of this, because it shows us that David didn't just write these things, but he lived them. Hold your finger here and turn to 1 Samuel chapter 23. And this is all happening pretty, even though there's 2 chapters difference, it's all happening boom, 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 right after. And this is all part of the same narrative and the same story that David's going through. So chapter 3, he's hiding, he's staying away from Saul. And in chapter 23, verse 1, it says, Then they told David, saying, Behold, the Philistines fight against Keilah. Keilah is a city in Judah, so this is a Jewish place. It says, And they robbed the